Well, next week, after 94 days of summer break, Canada's Parliament will get back to the calm, rational, and polite debate that it is so well known for. Right. Just like these three. Alan, Andrew, and Chantal are here tonight to help set the tone for next week. Let's start off on the F-35s. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, but we'll start off on the F-35s. This is happening with no open bidding on the contract. It's happening with no guarantee of jobs. It's all in $16 billion over time, a lot of money. Is this something that the Conservatives are going to regret doing? Is this a political problem for them, Alan?
Well, I think it's a big political problem, and that in many respects, the transparency and accountability may be the least of their problems, because what's happening is that there's almost an unholy and unlikely coalition of opposition lining up against this. I mean, first you have those who are against any kind of military spending or any increase in military spending. Then you've got an entirely different group that thinks that now is the time to be battening down the hatches, not spending more, and that this opens up their flank, that rather than being stewards of the taxpayers' money, that they're profligate spenders. And then lastly, what you're seeing is people wading in, so-called experts who otherwise might support military spending, who are questioning whether this is the proper aircraft to meet the missions that we want and to, engage in armed combat with the Russians. So it's, I think this is a real political stinker for them.
Well, if we ever got in armed combat with the Russians, it probably would be a good plane.
For most people, that prospect is laughable. So,
Chantal, what do you make of this?
Well, the fact that you're talking about that proposition kind of goes to the problem, and the issue really is purpose. But when you see a government enlist 8 cabinet ministers, 3 to go to a committee and 5 to go to various airline industry related places to talk about this on the same day, you know that this is a government that has realized it's got a problem. It's always been hard to sell contracts like that. Remember the helicopters and Jean Chrétien getting mileage out of saying that you would cancel the contract in similar fiscal circumstances, more or less. But also in a minority parliament, you would think at this point that the Conservatives would have discovered that the way to neuter these issues would be to get the Liberals on side, as they did with Afghanistan. Not just come with this fait accompli and offer this rather juicy issue for Mr. Ignatieff to say, well, I just, we'll review it. He doesn't even have to say, I'll cancel it.
You don't think so?
No.
I mean, if he really wants to be different, doesn't he have to say that?
I think because of the history of what happened with the helicopter contract, the cancellation, what happened after that, the wise Liberal position is to say, I need to look into this because I don't think they've done their homework. And at this point, there's not necessarily yet the contract to cancel.
How do you see it?
Well, I agree with that. I mean, it's an old political game is to make to sound as if you were opposed to it without actually saying you are, and people will hear what they want to hear. I agree with Chantal. Canceling that helicopter contract was the height of irresponsibility, and they don't want to bring up memories of that. I also agree that the government could do a better job of explaining this, but I do think they've got a plausible case to make if they're willing to get out there and make it. And I say if, I'm no military expert, but if the plane is as hot as they say it is, if it's worth the expense, the extra expense in military terms, then you could justify doing the sole source because there's only one company in the world that makes this plane. The problem is that's hard to take their word for it, particularly in the absence of a competitive bid, and particularly if they're not willing to really lay out the military case for it. And it really should rise or fall on its military merits. Instead, what are they doing? They're making their own version of the old industrial policy merits. Our guys will be able to bid on these worldwide contracts and we win all these billions of dollars of contracts. I think they'd be better advised in getting right to the nub of, is this a worthwhile expenditure of military dollars?
But I think the military issue, up to a point, is a red herring. It's probably a great plane. The question is, what is our defense need?
Yeah.
And that case hasn't been made. It's unclear why, based on our track record of what we've been doing militarily for the past 10 years, why this is where this money should go.
Okay, so bottom line, vote getter or vote loser?
Vote loser.
No?
yeah, absolutely.
At this point, but I think there's many innings to play in this game.
When the Russians invade?
Well, no, I mean, as I say, at some point I do think the fact that all of our allies are buying the same plane, so are they all out to lunch as well? Is there some merit in us participating as responsible allies in having interoperability between our planes and theirs? I think you can make a case if you're patient about it and you get out there and make the case rather than hiding behind, two clever little economic arguments.
All right. All the parties in Ottawa today were talking about what their agenda is for next week and how nice they're going to be to each other when the actual debates begin in the House of Commons. John Baird, guy who used to walk around this city in Toronto when he was a provincial cabinet minister, seemed to love it here. He comes up today and starts talking about the problems that the Conservatives are having on the gun registry, blames it all on the Toronto elite. This is the same guy last year who used another word to describe Toronto, or at least the mayor of Toronto, depending on how you want to read it. That word started with an F. So he's gone from F to E.
Well, that's civilization.
Yeah, exactly. What should we make of this? Does it mean anything? Alan?
Well, it's like a drug addict that tries to kick its habit, but every time he sees the heroin, he just mainlines. They can't help themselves. I mean, you know, here we are, a government, an incumbent government, representing a nation which is the second most urban in the world, systematically alienating urban dwellers. And this is the same pattern that we see with the census. It's the same pattern as we see on the larger question of trying to force the long gun registry as a wedge issue. And basically, I think increasingly a strategic decision is saying we are going to write off huge portions of the Canadian constituency, and that if we're insulting them on the way by, that'll probably be good for the
lose
guys.
votes in Vancouver or Calgary or Winnipeg or Halifax by dumping on Toronto? No.
It isn't just Toronto, though. This
You don't win
don't read
votes
Toronto.
in Quebec, the place where the gun registry is the most iconic issue. It's not Toronto, actually. It's Quebec. And
Okay.
whenever a cabinet minister picks a city like that and says a comment like that, you kind of change that word. And imagine he'd said it's the Alberta elite or the Quebec elite. And then what would happen? Just because Toronto's fair game, it still makes it a divisive and counterproductive statement, and it doesn't actually echo reality in any way, shape, or form.
You have to at least get them points for consistency on this one. It's hard for me to say anything good about it. I think there are worse things you can call somebody than a Toronto elite. When did that become a curse word? I'm not quite so sure. But I agree, it's certainly not going to do their cause any great advantage, certainly in Toronto and possibly in the broader metropolitan type of voter. But as Alan was saying, that's not who they're going for anyway. They've got their target voter, and this fits entirely
And
with
they
them.
are at 30%.
I want to talk about Michael Ignatieff here for a bit. I talked to him, had an interview with him earlier this week, full interview on this weekend. Here's what he said about his own situation, because he concedes the fact after his bus tour that everybody seemed to think it went well, but in terms of his own party, which were mainly the people he was speaking to across the country, and the media seemed to have a different view of him. But he seemed pretty realistic in this answer to the question, what about you and the broader public in general? Here's a quick view of that.
But as a politician, I've got a lot of work to do to persuade Canadians what I believe, which is that this government has lost credibility on the economy. They're not good financial managers of the public purse. They have not got a long-term vision of what we knew to get Canada ready for the 21st century. My political judgment, Peter, is I've got a lot of more work to do to get that big, broad coalition of fiscally responsible, socially compassionate Canadians in that big red tent at the center. And that's what I've still got work to do.
All right, so he, talking about trying to connect with the broader Canadian electorate, he seems to have the same view of himself that pollsters have, but not necessarily the view he had of himself even a couple of months ago. Has this guy really changed?
Well, I don't know if he's changed, but he sure presents better. He doesn't look like he's trying out clever lines, but what I think is more fundamental, beyond prestance and presence, is the fact that they finally seem to have reversed the equation. It is not about the goal being to get the Conservatives out of power. It is about having different policies that make you want to get the Conservatives out of power. And until very recently, it was always about we're going to issue ultimatum and never about why you should do it. So at this point, at least, they've put the horse back in front of the cart. And it is closer to why people would want to change governments. You don't want to change governments just to change.
Andrew?
They've let him off the leash, I think, is what we're seeing there. He spent the summer kind of thinking aloud, if you will, in front of audiences, and really, I think, thinking through what exactly is his beef with Harper, why exactly does he want to replace him, and that's part of it. I think he's on the strongest footing, and he sounds the most convincing when it's about Harper's judgment, his style of government. We talked about this last week. He's less I think, on firm footing when he's talking about the economy. And it sounds almost perfunctory when he talks about the deficit. And the Liberals have problems way beyond Mike Ignatieff's salesmanship when it comes to the economy. They are in favor of increasing the deficit and decreasing it. They are in favor of using the billions of dollars they say they will save from not reducing the corporate tax rate further, both for reducing the deficit and for spending on social programs. They've got to get a coherent economic message before that issue is going to turn to their advantage, if it will even then, because I think the incumbent government has something of an advantage there. But he's a much more persuasive, authentic spokesman now than he was in the past.
You know, it's interesting, Alan. I put to him the point you made the other night, that he's managed to at least appear to be on a different side of the broader economic question than the Conservatives. Conservatives saying moving into a period of austerity, the Liberals saying, hold on, we may need more stimulus. And I asked him, and it seemed to be the one question he had to think about before answering, as to whether he was convinced he was on the right side of that issue.
Well, because that for him is the tar baby. I mean, first, stylistically, you see that there is a recognition that some of the Conservatives' allegations that he is an elite Torontonian has stuck. So he's trying to show listening, which would put him more in touch. But strategically, I think there's big hints of what he's doing there. I mean, one, he knows that his Achilles heel vis-a-vis Harper is on economic management, and that's probably where he's going to have to fight the war anyway. So one of the things he's trying to do is open up Harper's flank that he is a spendthrift, that he's making bad expenditures and misspending and too much spending. But he also knows he has to resonate with the middle class. And in that regard, I mean, his last comment was perhaps most telling. I mean, Canadians are, by and large, fiscally conservative and socially compassionate. And that, you know, that's where he's going to stake his grounds at the end of the day. It's on values and how those values manifest themselves in a different approach to the economy.
Okay, I've only got 2 minutes left. I've got to touch on this Fox News North, Sun TV thing. It was certainly the talk in Ottawa, and it's inside the bubble kind of talk. I'm not sure how much it translates outside, and this is the departure of Corey Teneycke, a person we all know. Anybody who's covered politics in this country for the last 5 years certainly is aware of him. Should anybody care about this? Yeah. What was that all about?
It doesn't say great things, frankly, about this country, that the Pellado family, the Quebecor, figured the best way they could get their CRTC approval for their strange proposal, this strange kind of must-carry, must-offer thing for their news channel, was to get the Prime Minister's former spokesman to run the thing. And that somehow there'd be kind of a political play, you could push it through that way. If they're right in thinking that, that's certainly deeply troubling. And if they're wrong in thinking that, it still says that's the atmosphere that seems to be around here. So yeah, I think the fact that Corey Teneycke has fallen on his sword doesn't necessarily change that equation. We're still saying, in fact, in many ways, that CRTC decision now is going to be shrouded in political intrigue and suspicions, no matter what they rule on this. It's become a political football.
Chantal?
But his departure probably helps taking it out of spin wars and help people look at the journalism and the people they're recruiting and what it is about. Because at this point, the perception has become that this is an extension of the Prime Minister's office spin doctoring. And as long as he was going to, and I think he's largely responsible for creating that impression. If you're going to have someone who's handling something as delicate as the launch of a new media, hiring credible journalists, you do not want that person to be having arguments with Margaret Atwood and taking on all comers in the journalistic community, telling them you're all lousy and I have the truth and I will deliver it. So overdue departure, probably a good thing for Sun TV Media. As a journalist, you can't be against having more outlets for information.
Alan, you got the quick last word.
Well, it's much to do about nothing. I can't imagine so much debate about something that isn't happened and never will. I mean, first, there's no hue and cry for more news, let alone any right-wing news. Secondly, a must-carry or a must-offer license is like beachfront property, except there's no more left. It doesn't matter if Corey is there or not. They're not getting a license for Sun TV.
Okay. Well, we'll find out whether you're right when the CRTC makes a decision. Thank you all. Good discussion.